last time Andrew was in town in Austin, he did a lecture at the ACA building. That was for FFRF and everything. And he's been a guest on my Wednesday night show on the line, the Hang Up, several times. But today, I sent you a link about basically, you remember about 15 years ago when we were saying, what's the matter with Kansas? So today it's, what's the matter with Arkansas? Fill us in.
So Arkansas is trying to get creationism back in public schools again. So this is the thing everybody's seeing in the news is HB 1701, and that is a bill that would, quote, allow creationism to be taught as a theory of how the earth came to be in public schools. The bill has already passed the House in Arkansas, and the Senate could take it up this week. So two things right off the bat that I need to make clear. One, this is one of 900 different bills that the Freedom from Religion Foundation is tracking across the country. Not all those are bad bills. Some of them are actually good. Like you don't get to be exempt from a vaccine because you think your God said something along those lines. But about 2/3 or more of those 900 are bad bills that we don't want to pass. The second thing that everybody really needs to know is if you have kids in public schools in Arkansas, please contact FFRF right now. You can send an email to arklawsuit@ffrf.org. That's like Arkansas, like Ark or Noah's Ark, arklawsuit@ffrf.org. I expect this bill to pass the way it's going. And it's absolutely crazy when you know the history of trying to get creationism taught in the public schools and trying to ban evolution from being taught in the public schools, that not only are they trying to do this again, but they're trying to do this again in Arkansas. Matt, how much of that history do you know?
Well, bits and pieces, because we've had to go through this several times, but
yeah. So in 1925, July 1925, that was when the Scopes trial ended. And people forget, like, creationism won in the Scopes trial. So Scopes, the teacher, was found guilty in criminal court of violating a statute that made it illegal to teach any theory that denies the story of divine creation of man as taught in the Bible. Okay, William Jennings Bryan, the famous creationist who ran for president a bunch of times, died 5 days after that trial. And kind of everybody remembers that. But less famously, the successful prosecution of that teacher led to this wave of anti-evolution, pro-creationism bills all over the South.
Right.
And most of those failed, but Mississippi and... Can you guess, Matt? What was the other state that actually made a ban on evolution the law of the land?
Oh, it's probably Arkansas.
It's Arkansas. So in 1928, Arkansas made it a crime to teach the theory or doctrine that mankind ascended or descended from a lower order of apes. Okay, so 40 years after that, the Supreme Court decides a case called Epperson versus Arkansas. And that struck down that same statute. So you have this brave science teacher. She's a 10th grade biology teacher, Susan Epperson, I believe at Little Rock Central High. She challenged the law and she won. And in it, the court said, look, this law is clearly an attempt to blot out a particular scientific theory because it conflicts supposedly with the biblical account of creation. So that law violates the First Amendment, so it's got to go. But that's not all. 13 years later, in 1981, both Arkansas and Louisiana passed one of these balanced treatment for creationism and evolution bills.
The balanced stuff is amazing. It's always like, in the same way that Fox News would say, oh, we're going to try and be fair and balanced. We need to teach both sides. We need to teach both sides. And I mean, I know you're getting ready to get into it, but the thing that's frustrated me so much, and I know we're going to talk about this a little bit more, is there aren't both sides. If you want to say, hey, let's teach the science, and by the way, we'd also like to teach religious stuff in school. Well, that's what a comparative religions course is for. This shouldn't be in a science classroom because creationism isn't science. And that's where I think Arkansas really goes off the deep end with this one, but keep going.
And I mean, and that's essentially what courts have come down. They've said, yeah, like you can teach this as not a literal scientific truth in a religion classroom where you're comparing, but you can't teach it in a science classroom. And these balanced treatment laws, basically, they don't prohibit evolution. So that's sort of a step in the right direction.
Right.
But they're, as you're saying, they're trying to teach this controversy that doesn't exist. And so a federal court in Arkansas in 1982 in a case called McLean versus, I think, the Arkansas Board of Education, struck down that statute as well. And so I'm reminded of that popular definition, you know, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is the popular definition of insanity. And that's what you have here. I mean, this is now Arkansas's essentially third attempt to do this over the course of a century, and every single time they've been smacked down by the courts. And my question is, well, why? Like, why, after so many judicial beatings and embarrassing losses, would you want to do this again? And the answer, I spent a lot of time watching all the hearings for this bill and the debates for this bill, and the sponsor is Representative Bentley. And I mean, she said some things that were pretty far out there. She said, scientists have been on both sides of this issue for thousands of years. She said Newton, he believed in God and biblical creation, so that's fine. Galileo, he believed in God and biblical creation, so that's fine. Then she gets into, there are things, phenomenon, she says, in our nature that evolution can't explain, like, and then she does this big exposition of the fine-tuning argument. And she was doing this, you know, on the floor of the House before they're getting ready to vote on the bill. She did it during the education hearing committee meeting when they were doing this bill. But the thing that really motivated her, there's two things. And the one is very obvious. The Supreme Court changed. So, you know, if you've been watching, if anybody's been watching you and I on other appearances, I've talked about how our courts are broken. They have been packed. And the Supreme Court, especially, we are in desperate need of court expansion and reform, like yesterday. And she said, this sponsor said, somebody asked her, why are we going to do this when the Supreme Court and all these federal courts have told us we can't? And she said, the Supreme Court is different now. I believe we have a different Supreme Court. And I believe we can look at things and decide that maybe we should look at them again. I think we have different members of the Supreme Court. That's what she said. I want
to interject with one side question, and for anybody who's not following along, Andrew and I have had a number of conversations about packing the court. I noticed something interesting in my YouTube feed, and that is Fox News in the past week has posted a couple of, I don't watch Fox News, but they've done segments and they'll show up in my YouTube thing. 2 different segments, one of them with Justice Breyer giving his thoughts opposing packing the court, and another one with RBG opposing packing the court. Is this, I'm the optimist in me thinks that these segments are coming out from Fox News because it's a real possibility that we might get around to trying to pack the court.
It is. And let's frame this correctly too. The court is already packed. Okay, that's where we are. The court has been packed. What we're talking about now is reforming, rebalancing, correcting, and expanding the court. And you know, the Supreme Court has changed sizes. Excuse me. I think it's 9, maybe 7 different times throughout its history. The size of the Supreme Court is not set in the Constitution. It's set by Congress. So this is a normal function of Congress. And typically it's been tied to the number of circuits that we have in the country. So, you know, the 1st Circuit, the 5th Circuit, the 11th Circuit. We now have 13 circuits across the country. There's been a reluctance to expand the court for political reasons, because they didn't want to politicize the court. Congress didn't want to politicize the court, but the court's gone. The court has been politicized. It has been packed. I mean, there were seats that were stolen. I mean, there's no way around that argument. So it's too late for that. So what we're talking about now is correction and rebalancing, and we should have 13 justices to match the number of circuits. That's historically the way it's been. And the reason you're seeing that is because Congress is about to make some big steps in that direction this week. That's all I feel like I can say confidently. Sure. But people, you keep an eye out this week and you'll see some exciting proposals on that front.
So getting back a little bit to Arkansas now, obviously this is legislation for Arkansas. So we're talking about the Arkansas House, and the bill passed.
Correct.
Like overwhelmingly, because it's fucking Arkansas.
Yes.
And I was going to ask, but you already answered it, that yes, part of this is based on the suspicion that the U.S. Supreme Court has changed. But has the Arkansas Supreme Court changed? Because can't this be challenged in Arkansas? And if the Arkansas Supreme Court is like, hey, we're not even going to bother the U.S. Supreme Court with this, you can try and appeal this, but this is some bullshit that we've knocked down.
Yeah, and you could challenge it just in state court. That could still be removed to federal court. There are ways to take things that are in state court and get them to federal court. There are also ways to prevent that from happening in some cases. Theoretically, you could craft a case so that the U.S. Supreme Court would never look at it. I mean, even I'll say this too. Historically, the fight against creationism and for evolution is one of the areas where our courts have been strongest over the years. I have no confidence in the Supreme Court because it has been packed, but it is one of the areas that we have a lot. They'd have to overturn a lot of jurisprudence to try to make any kind of sense out of this.
We made a lot of progress, even, 12, 13, 14, 15 years ago, when I was, actually 17 years ago, before I started as a regular host on here. I actually, one of the first things I did in association with the Atheist Community of Austin is I'd written a blog post basically on the 10 Commandments decision, and how Justice Breyer invented a grandfather clause out of whole cloth in that case. It's like, I thought, and so that's why I don't care what his opinion is about backing the court, because he just invented something, and I'm not a lawyer. And so I love it when I talk to my constitutional lawyer friends like you, that I was like, I picked up, I'm just a layperson sitting here reading this, and I'm like, hang on, what difference does it make if nobody complained about the one in Texas for 50 years? Isn't that symptomatic of the fact that one of the reasons people don't complain about this for 50 years is that you become the bad guy, you become oppressed by saying, oh no, I'm a godless heathen who doesn't want your 10 Commandments on you. And so that got extended, thanks to Eugenie Scott and others who were fighting the intelligent design movement from the co-design proponentsists. Anybody listening who's not familiar with this, if you're new to all this, there were creation science documents that they were trying to get in schools, and so, but they knew they couldn't say creationists, and so they went through their creationist textbook and replaced every instance of creationist with intelligent design proponents.
But they did a find and replace that. Like, it's very clear that they did like the software version of the find and replace.
And evidently, and we found the transitional form, because at least one of those replacements had the first couple letters of creationist, CR, and then design proponents, and then ISTS at the end. So they inserted design proponents right in the middle of the word creationist. They just got sloppy with it, with the one instance that wasn't a cut and paste. But so let me ask you this. I know that if you're in Arkansas right now, and what needs to happen in a lot of these cases is, in order to have standing to go up against these things, we need people who are Arkansas residents, who have kids in their schools. And you've already mentioned, that they should be contacting the Freedom from Religion Foundation. What else can people in Arkansas do? And what else can people outside of Arkansas do? So
one thing that is important that people can do is the Senate could take up this bill this week. The bill is in the Senate Education Committee right now. You should contact that education committee and the senators on it and tell them not to pass this bill. FFRF put out an action alert. It should be up on our website under, I believe, news, and then you go down to action. And that should have one of the ways, at least, to contact that committee. That is the number one thing we can do. The best thing to do is to get this bill stopped in its tracks. I'm not terribly optimistic of that. So we do need to start hearing from parents and families that have kids in the Arkansas public schools. And so you can email us at arclawsuit, all one word, at ffrf.org, so we can start taking a look, especially if you're interested in challenging this. And Matt, I think we have to hit on one other thing that I have not heard anybody else talk about, but I think is really important about this. Because you mentioned that this was passed overwhelmingly. And it was like, I don't remember it was 70 something to 20 something that this passed the House. And this same bill she proposed, Representative Bentley proposed this same bill in 2017. It was HB 2050 back then. And it failed. And I think the difference is the demonization of our trans brothers and sisters right now. If you look at the timeline for this bill, Representative Bentley gives this speech on March 9th, in which she quotes the Bible 5 different times, including the Genesis account of creation. And it is in the context of that Arkansas law denying healthcare for trans kids. It is in that context that she is doing this. She begins by saying George Washington once said, "It's impossible to govern without God in the Bible," which George Washington never said. So she starts off with like this false Christian nationalist narrative. Anyway, that's
listening to David Barton too much.
Yeah. Everybody knows that's my personal hobby horse. So I got to get on it for a second. But then she a couple days later, she makes this it's an anti-trans Facebook post, and she recounts her understanding of creationism pretty extensively. And, she's talking about her March 9th speech, and she introduced this bill to get creationism in the public schools on March 11th, just 2 days after that speech. And I don't think that those two things can be easily separated. And I think the fact that the bill passed overwhelmingly this time and was completely ignored just a couple of years ago also suggests that she was behind the scenes, or maybe even more publicly, talking about it in that context. And if people have any information on that, we'd love to hear about that as well.
Wow. So first of all, yeah, thank you. By the way, everybody who's watching, if you missed any of that, go back and rewind for the last 2 minutes, because this is the sort of thing that some people will say, "Oh, well, I don't see that connection at all." I didn't notice this connection, but it makes complete sense, and it only makes complete sense. Here, let me do this.
Well, I mean,
So back when I was a Christian, and I would have never wore a hat like this, but I might have had the bumper sticker on my car. If I were and I was a Southern Baptist, if I were bigoted with regard to our transgender friends and family members, the Bible would be one of the things that I'd love to be able to go to point to. But it seems that they've done everything they can to take the Bible out of the school in no sense. So it makes sense that if you can get creationism taught in schools, now all of a sudden your pithy little bumper stickers of God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, and there's 2 genders and God created them and all this other stuff. Now you have like under the radar, I guess not too much under the radar, but it is manipulative and slimy, because we know if you have kids in school and you teach them about God and what God wants, they're not going to question that as often as perhaps if they learned about it for the first time as an adult. And so, yeah, we're back to, they're trying to poison our kids' minds.
And if you put your hat on, I mean, the Bible quote that she probably turned to. And in that March 9th speech where she quotes the Bible 5 different times and she misquotes George Washington, she cites Genesis 1:27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female created he them. Yeah. And that is what she's preaching about, all these horrific anti-trans provisions in another bill. And then just a couple days later, you get, we're going to put creationism back in the public schools too. And I just don't see those two things being separable.
Well, thanks for that. We're going to get to calls in just a couple minutes. I want to point out a couple other things for people in chat. One of the reasons I was laughing so hard is when you told me, or you told everybody about how she said they've been arguing about this for thousands of years. Yeah. There hasn't been a creationism evolution battle for thousands of years, because Darwin only published it about 160 some odd years ago. And so we haven't even had the creationism evolution battle quite that long. It's funny, but theists and fundamentalist Christians in particular have been, and I don't blame all of them. They've been fed a lot of bullshit, and it's both from their preachers, and some of them, I don't think that people out there know that they're spreading misinformation. They just believe David Barton and the Wall Builders when they talk about, church-state separation, which is why we keep recommending Andrew's book for people so that you can find out about the foundation myth. But they not only rely on the Wall Builders for the violation of church-state separation stuff, but they have this completely altered version of history in their head and of science in their head and of what should count as science and what should and shouldn't be taught in public schools. And they want to tell people they've removed prayer from school. Nobody has ever removed prayer from school. It's not even possible to remove prayer from school. Every time a test hits a desk, somebody's fucking praying. What we've removed is government-led, forced, mandated prayer. And that's a good thing because, and it should be supported by everybody. It's only the people who were essentially massively privileged who got an attitude adjustment that are upset about it. Because if you're a Jew, you don't want Christian prayers at the beginning of school. If you're a Christian, you don't want Jewish prayers at the beginning of school. And you don't want Muslim prayer. Nobody wants Muslim prayers. Oh my gosh.
And we can refine that even slightly. It doesn't have to be forced prayer. So you cannot use the machinery of the state to promote your personal religion, right? I mean, that's just like a nice, simple rule. And that includes using the public schools. That includes, if you are in the public schools, using the public address system in the mornings. You don't get to use the machinery of the state, the power of the state, the power of a state office to promote or impose your personal religion on other people. That's just not a power that exists for any government office in the United States of America.
And the other reason I was laughing, this is just a side note. We're going to get to calls in just a second, but every time Andrew said phenomena, in my head it went do 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 do. Phenomena. Do, 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 do. Sometimes my brain does stuff just for me. Some of these jokes aren't for any of you at all.